Welcome everyone to this very special event, Women in Displacement, a conversation between Monique Truong and Leena Al-Mujahed, co-presented by Singapore Unbound and Advocates for Refugees, Singapore. My name is G. Leong Ko, and I'm the founder and organizer of Singapore Unbound, a literary nonprofit based in New York City, dedicated to the struggle for freedom of expression and equal rights for all. Towards these goals, Singapore Unbound organizes insightful events such as this one and publishes vital Asian authors through our indie press, Gaudy Boy. This month, we are so proud to be publishing the Singapore and Malaysia edition of the extraordinary novel, The Sweetest Fruits, by Vietnamese-American author Monique Truong. Monique is the author of the best-selling novels, The Book of Salt and Bitter in the Mouth. The Sweetest Fruits is her third novel, and perhaps it is her greatest achievement yet. It tells the stories of three remarkable women, Rosa, Alethea, and Sesu, who all loved the Greek-Irish writer Lafcadio Hearn, but who have been erased or marginalized in the biographies written about the great man. Monique recovers through research and imagination the stories of these women and retells them in vibrant and delicious prose. They are the stories of displacement between countries or within, and these stories are inspired by Monique's own experience of displacement when, as a child, she was forced to leave South Vietnam with her family and take refuge in the US. She will be reading from her novel tonight and talking about the formative experience of being a refugee. Singapore Unbound is so pleased to be holding this event with Advocates for Refugees Singapore, a ground-up and volunteer-led movement based in Singapore working for the cause of refugees. Mathilda Ho, the founder of Advocates for Refugees, will tell you more about their work in a minute. Here, I just want to say what a pleasure and honor it is to be working with Mathilda and her team, Shanice Goh, Beth Lee, and Wani, to put together this event. They are incredibly thoughtful and passionate about the immense work of raising public awareness of refugee rights. This year, in their annual campaign called RAW 2021, they have focused on having refugees tell their own stories, stories of dangerous escape, uncertain exile, and, for a lucky few, safe resettlement. These are stories that we don't hear enough of from mainstream media, which far too often depicts refugees as a threatening flood. The flood metaphor evokes an overwhelming disaster. As a metaphor, it has the emotional power of arousing fear. We must learn to identify such harmful metaphors in mainstream stories, and we must learn to disarm them. More, we must replace them with other metaphors from the real lives of refugees. Tonight, we will also hear from Leena Al-Mujahed in conversation with Monique Truong. Leena is a refugee from Yemen, currently based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. She's the founder and the leader of the Yemeni Refugee Women Association, whose mission is to help, support, and empower Yemeni refugee women in Malaysia to improve their lives and participate in the community. Leena has an extraordinary story to tell. It is a story not just of dangers and difficulties, but also of agency, activism, and community building. When I read her story, published on Singapore Unbound's blog, the metaphor that comes to mind is that of a sweet tropical fruit, such as a mango, or better still, the water-borne coconut. The coconut is famous for having 1,000 uses. Its oil is used for making soaps and cosmetics. Its husk is used for making ropes. In the same way, Leena has made use of her difficult circumstances to produce and provide so much goodness to people around her. New stories offer new metaphors for living. As you listen to Monique and Leena tell their stories, you will find your own metaphors to take away with you after this event. Metaphors for displacement, yes, but also metaphors for survival, human flourishing, and social cooperation. In the spirit of cooperation, Singapore Unbound and Gaudy Boy are donating all proceeds from the sale of Monique's novel, The Sweetest Fruits, during this event to the Yemeni Refugee Women Association. Monique has signed these copies for you, and we have only 45 copies altogether. To get this limited signed edition, please make a donation of $25 or more at the Fractured Atlas link provided in chat. $25 is about 33 Singapore dollars. Please remember to include your mailing address for the book. You may make the donation at any time during this event. Please give generously. Mathilda Ho from Advocates for Refugees Singapore will now tell you more about their work. Mathilda, please.
Thank you, G. Thank you for the opening remarks, and also wanted to start by thanking Gaudy Boy for having me here and for co-presenting this event in commemoration with World Refugee Day, which happened last weekend on 20th of June. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate Monique for the Singapore and Malaysia launch of the Sweetest Fruits and for graciously sharing this platform with everyone to converse not only about your novel, but on your experiences alongside with Leena, our friend and guest joining us from Malaysia. So good evening to everyone and good day to everyone who are tuning in. I'm Matilda from Advocates for Refugees. Actually, for this next couple of minutes, I will just aim to share a bit about the global forced displacement crisis, as well as some of the experiences and work that AFR Advocates for Refugees have been doing. So in my years of leading Advocates for Refugees, it's struck many to pose this unoriginal question to me, often in the colloquial tone, like Singapore got refugees meh, right? It's almost like they're asking me this question and they're also saying to me that it can't be true. And for some of you who might know, this is the 5th year that we are hosting Refugee Awareness Week, or RAW 2021. It is an annual awareness campaign. And since we've started, I remember the figures all too well, because every year there has been a surge in global forced displacement, and it is a constant reminder of the need to continue working on refugee awareness so that not only can people be informed about the situation, but that they also can and recognize that they are able to contribute to make a difference. So global forced displacement has no signs of stopping, even when the world is down with COVID-19. So just to draw a parallel, in 2019, at the end of 2019, there were about 79.5 million who are globally displaced. What about by the end of 2020? So by the end of 2020, we are seeing that there are 82.4 million individuals displaced worldwide. Even as the world is grappling with the pandemic, wars, violence, and crimes against humanity have not stopped. This has caused people to continue to move for the sake of finding safety. Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a human rights treaty, Article 14 on the right to asylum actually indicates that individuals are granted the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution. It is also my personal belief that the right to asylum should not be a privilege only for people who have the economic means or status. As such, Advocates for Refugees was established in the aftermath of the 2015 Andaman Sea crisis in order to promote the humane and dignified treatment of refugees and displaced persons, specifically in the Southeast Asia region, and we want to also look at it on the global level. So these are the 3 areas of our work as a community-led movement. We focus on organizing awareness campaigns such as RAW. We also conduct research in order to understand ground sentiments and perception towards refugees and migrants. Recently, we have also published a research titled Singapore and Refugees on the Social Collab SG platform. Lastly, we also try to facilitate partnerships in order to support and empower refugees in neighboring countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia. So one thing that G mentioned that we are aiming to work on today and also focus in our campaign is actually on centering refugees' voices. So around this time last year, we first launched Voices, which is an online segment to center voices of refugees. And these 5 individuals you see on screen have contributed their thoughts on the theme of borders as well as its effects on refugees. So interestingly, around this time last year as well, I received a series of messages on Facebook in relation to our campaign. So what you can see here on screen is actually a screenshot of one of the messages. And in summary, what this individual is saying is for asking for Rohingya refugees in Malaysia to go back to their own country. And why am I sharing this here today? Because I feel that it really puts things into greater perspective for me, for us as advocates, because we often expect governments to accept refugees when the onus is also on us as individuals to stay informed and step forward to address misconceptions and try to shatter stereotypes and stigmas about refugees. So this year's campaign, which is themed More Than, is aiming to amplify the voices of displaced communities and also to dispel the stigmas and stereotypes surrounding displacement. Through this platform, we center their voices with storytelling and community dialogue. As you know, today's event and also this year's campaign is all about storytelling and dialogues. And what I've realized about the campaign so far is really the importance of creating platforms for advocacy and also for discussion about the challenges that marginalized communities such as refugees and asylum seekers face. And also really about the role of literature and creative arts in that it gives voice and visibility to the experiences of marginalized communities. At the start, of course, I've started with sharing about statistics, but statistics can only tell you about the magnitude of global forced displacement. So I want to ask, what about the human face of displacement? And at this point, I want to challenge everyone to continue seeking these personal stories and to learn from their experiences, even if at times it makes you feel uncomfortable. And this is because our ability to relate to these experiences will make our society one that is more compassionate and humane. It goes without saying that I'm really pleased to be here today to hear from Monique and later on from Leena share their perspectives and experiences. And I also look forward to the discussions later to be moderated by Nursyazwani or Wani, my dear friend. So thank you everyone again for taking time to come together to join us in solidarity. I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of today's lineup. So at this point in time, I would like to actually pass the floor over to Monique for her to get into a reading of her novel, The Sweetest Fruits. Monique, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matilda. That was incredibly informative presentation. And it is such an honor to be part of this effort. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to read tonight for you, this morning for me, from The Sweetest Fruits. And I'm going to read a section that I usually do not read from. And this is in the voice of Setsu, who is Lafcadio Hearn's Japanese wife. She lived from 1868 to 1932, and she's speaking to us from Tokyo in the year 1909. And she's recounting here her travels, her early travels with Lafcadio Hearn, and essentially acting as his interpreter. At the seaside village of Hamamura, we were lodging at a small inn that met with all your requirements, plus another that you said was somewhat elusive, but was best described by the English word cozy, how the body feels when you drink a cup of hot tea on a very cold night, I remember was your definition. We had timed our arrival in Hamamura for the Obon, as Nishida-san had thought that its Bon Odori, the annual dance to welcome back the spirits of the ancestors, would intrigue you. He had heard that the dance was different from village to village along the Hoki coast. What Nishida-san had not anticipated was that the people of Hamamura and the nearby villages did not want a foreigner to frighten their ancestors upon their yearly return. The villagers refused to perform their bon odori in front of you, Yakumo. Yakumo, by the way, was Lafcadio Hearn's Japanese first name, or rather his given name. The innkeeper, her face wrinkled as a dried salted plum, was the one who informed me. Once the people of Hamamura had made up their minds, the other villagers followed suit, dispatching representatives to the inn to warn the innkeeper not to send the foreigner and his Rashomon their way. The foreigner is harmless, I heard myself saying to the old woman. In his yukata and straw hat worn low, none of the returning spirits will even know. Her eyes, their lids pried wide open by unseen fingers, informed me that I had overstepped the bounds of honor. To deceive the ancestors on the one night of their return from the unseen world, I could see on her ashen face, was an unforgivable offense. Cholera, I said to you instead. All large gatherings are forbidden. No bon odori this year. A shame, I added. Husband, you believed me. Even when the villagers of Hamamura threw fistfuls of sand at us as we departed, you believed me. Forgive me, Yakumo, but even you were not blind to their bodies, their arms tensing and coiling. What I feared more was their silence. The villagers thought that you would not understand if they jeered or shouted, so they did not waste their words. We were seen but unseen. We were the returning spirits, but with no families to greet us. We had died among strangers. A curse, Yakumo. Gentle and silent was what you would say to Nishida-san upon our return to Matsue. The villagers on the Hoki coast were gentle and silent. Nishida-san asked me if those words were true. Friends of his passing through Hamamura had heard the villagers tell a very different story. My face burned with shame that I had felt in Hamamura and that I could not show there. Nishida-san quickly apologized for having made such an error in judgment. I should not have sent Haran-san to the Hoki coast, he said, but he takes such pleasure from being the first, as you know, he explained. I know. I should have thought of you, Satsu, he said. It was the first and only time that Nishida-san would call me by my true name. Upon hearing Setsu released from his lips, an intimacy implied, an affection kindled, a heart so near to mine. I heard my true name for what it had been until then, an afterthought in the lives of men. I know, I repeated with a sharpness in tone that took him by surprise. You continue to believe, Yakumo. We would again find ourselves in remote villages where your Western face was the first. At each location, you professed, and I voiced for you a keen interest in Shinto shrines, Buddhist temples, and the local folklore, superstitions, and beliefs. But the faith that you harbored within you was the one that you wanted most to find. You looked at the bodies around you and you deemed them gentle. You wanted to see in those bodies something distant and apart from the brutal ones that you had known. A body is a body, Yakumo, gentle and brutal. Nothing, in truth, separated yours from theirs. Thank you.
Right. Thanks so much, Monique, for the beautiful reading. I really love the last part. A body is a body, Yakumo, gentle and brutal, nothing in truth separated yours from theirs. And right now, I'm really looking forward to our future conversations. So again, hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for coming to the panel today. And thank you, Monique, for the beautiful reading. I'm Wani, a member of the AFR-SG and a PhD student right here in UPenn. So currently I'm based in Philly. So good morning to all of us in the US. Good afternoon and evening to those who are in different places and different time zones. Thanks again to the organizers for curating this important space to amplify the voices of the displaced, the minoritized, and the marginalized. So again, I'm privileged to be here today with Monique and Leena. And thank you both for being willing and to perform the labor to share your own experiences and thoughts about displacement. And I'm looking forward to our upcoming conversations later. Thank you also to Singapore Unbound and Gaudy Boy for donating all the proceeds to the YRWA. So for those of us in the audience, help us surpass our goal of raising $2,000 and purchase Monique's The Sweetest Fruits, as we can actually hear from like the short excerpt just now, it's so beautiful, via the Fractured Atlas platforms, and all proceeds will go directly to YWRA. Thank you again, and we super appreciate it. So I wish I have more time to engage in a conversation and for me to actually just talk a bit more. But of course, this space today is not for me. So I'm just going to go to jump right straight into our conversations with Monique and Leena. So to our audience members, please keep your microphones muted and post any questions you have here in the chat. Or if you'd like to, maybe you can use the raise hand functions later during our Q&A, and I will just call on you later. So maybe to take moderator's privilege, I'll just start with questions for the panelists, Monique and Leena, before opening it up to our audience here. So Monique and Leena, maybe we can start with a very basic question, like, can you share with us a bit more about yourself? Where are you currently based in, where you're from, what you're doing right now, and also before you were displaced?
Leena, would you like to begin?
Yes, as you like. Okay. First, good evening and for everyone, and good morning for Monique. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really pleasure to have this opportunity to be here to speak up about the refugee situation, especially the women. Thank you so much, Monique, for giving me this opportunity to speak up on behalf of the book that you are published. I started read it. It's really touching my heart. Okay, everyone. My name is Leena Al-Mujahed. I now live in Kuala Lumpur, but I was born in Sana'a, Yemen. I'm 26 years old. I'm medical laboratory specialist, graduate in Yemen, and now I'm MBA student in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. I'm women rights activist, Yemeni Refugee community leader in Malaysia, and I'm representative for the Yemeni Refugee Women in UNHCR, and I'm the founder of the Yemeni Refugee Women Association. Yes, Monique, that's it.
Thank you, Leena. It's like I said, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. I was born in South Vietnam in 1968, and my family and I came to the United States in April of 1975 as refugees. And I am currently based in Brooklyn, New York, where, as you can see, the sunlight is going in and out of the clouds as we speak. I am a novelist, I am an essayist, I am a librettist as well, and I also was a lawyer by training, and I am very happy, I have to say, not to practice law right now, but I do feel that my writing is a kind of advocacy, which continues my legal training and practice. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Monique and Leena, for sharing that. Maybe we can move on to, like, thinking about your own experiences or your own lived experiences when you were in your host country. So maybe Leena and Monique, what was it like when you first arrived in your host country? And how does being a woman in your host country differ from your experiences back home? If any of you would like to start.
Okay, maybe I will start. Okay. Actually, in Yemen, I was the organizer of all the cardiology and internal medicine conferences in the country. So I organized many international conferences and events before I left Yemen. But when I first arrived in Malaysia, I was lost. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know anyone who could assist me. For example, my family used to own our house in Yemen, but in Malaysia, I didn't even know how to go about finding a house to rent. And as a mother in a foreign country with a young child, I faced even more difficulties and responsibilities because I face a different life, different language, different people, system, traditional culture, everything is different. Even the way in working is totally different than the way we worked in Yemen. We used to work in Yemen. So I knew that I should assess myself when I realized that no one can help me. So I start to build my own connections, try to learn more about the refugees, because I have no idea what is the meaning of refugee. So I start to know about it. I create a connections with a lawyer in Malaysia just to know how is our situation and how is the country system. Also creating a friends and local friends that can assist you to know more about this country. I tried to ask and assist from my community, but all the feedbacks was negative. So I choose to never ask anyone, because I know and I feel them that they are suffering, so they cannot give me any positive feedback. So I choose to ask the locals, to be close with the locals, so who they can assist me and show me the way. So really, when I know everything, the life become easier for me. And then I know that there is another woman facing the same things that I faced before. So really, from my heart, I choose to help them. I don't want them to go through the levels that I go through. I want them to know the light directly. So that's why we are from the same country. We have the same language. So it will be easy for them if they find someone to show them just the way. So that's what I'm trying to do it with the women in my community.
Thank you, Leena. Well, I have to say that my experience is very different from Leena, because when my family and I came over, I was a child. You know, I was 6 years old in the refugee camps, and I turned 7 there. And so for me, the experience was more of confusion, you know, just, and helplessness. I think that the profound level of helplessness was witnessing that my parents had become not necessarily helpless, but less. Do you know, they had lost their position in their community, in their, clearly their country. But both my parents were privileged in the sense that they were fluent in English as well as French. So they had at least that. But at that point in my life, I didn't understand that was a privilege. All I saw was the lack, you know, and the lack and the changes, the profound changes, and having no way of making that experience better for myself or for them. And I think this is why when I hear of Leena's work, I am moved that her organization is focusing not only on women, but on children, you know, and thinking about how to make them feel at home in their host country.
Great. Thanks so much for that. And I think thinking about privilege, lack, and loss due to displacement, it also makes me think a lot about what you both also mentioned, and I think what Leena mentioned about being labeled as a refugee. And I think like even the label of a refugee itself must be so challenging on so many levels. And I remember like, you know, speaking to my interlocutors back in Malaysia about how, you know, being refugee themselves always makes them feel as if they're not even a human person, right? And I think like in thinking about what y'all have been talking about, being a woman itself also brings its own set of challenges. So maybe if Monique and Leena, you could talk a bit more about like, you know, what are some of the challenges that displaced women in your host countries face?
Yes, of course. There are many challenges. For me and for the women, there are a lot of Yemeni women who are single mothers, living alone or divorced, and because the life has taught me how to be strong, I and many women grow up in a very close community, close-minded community, where the expectation was the girls would just get married and give children, that's it. She cannot have any dreams, seriously. So I am one of them. I was married at the age of 16, and I had my daughter when I was only 18. But I believe that education is very important, and it was a big challenge for me to complete my university studying, but thankfully that my parents were unusually supporting of my ambitions, maybe because they felt guilty that I was married at such an early age, and allowed me to go back to my studies and to enroll for a bachelor degree. My story is similar for many women's story, Yemeni women's story. They forced to get married, they forced to stop their schools or universities. They're not allowed to work or to be a leader, a woman leader, or someone who can make a decision. So I realized that in Malaysia, women have faced many serious challenges, which are like the health issues, the education. Then they are not allowed to work, and of course the mental health, especially during the COVID-19. I'm facing a crisis for the women and the kids. They are really like going to be crazy. They are, because most of the families, because they are not allowed to work in Malaysia, so they work day by day. Sometimes they have work, some days they haven't. So imagine that during the COVID and the lockdown and the MCO, so they cannot even go out to find anything to do to receive any money for the day lunch, or for their today, or for their day dinner. So they are like, most of them, they cannot now educate their kids. They forced to just leave the schools. Sometimes I visited some houses, like there were even a water inside their houses. And because, you know, the Yemenis really, as I mentioned before, Monique, it's first time for the Yemenis to be a refugee. It's a different situation. So they still feel that it's like shame for them to be a refugee. They don't know that they are heroes. They just feel shame that I don't want anyone to know that I am a refugee. Then they will just keep silence, even if they did never find the food in their houses. And instead of speaking that I'm a refugee, I need help, or I need to work, I have degrees in medicals or whatever, so they keep silence. And that's why I'm trying to be like a friends in the community. I want to be like their friends, so they can share with me what they are facing. I face many families who they don't want to even me to know that they are facing a situation like this, but we're still trying to find it. It's something new, and I understand that it's one of the most challenges. And as I mentioned before, the four main things, the challenge is that public health, education, working, and the mental health.
Well, I think Leena ended on a very sort of powerful word, shame, right? And that the loss of one's country, whether temporary or you know, permanently, is really is perceived as a shameful status. And I think what I'd like to say about that is what G began the discussion with, which is the idea of, we need new stories, we need new metaphor. And in this context, we have to ask ourselves as a society, who is brave, who is creative, who is intrepid, who is heroic. And I would say that among top really, for at least, in my opinion, on that list would be refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants and migrants. These are optimistic people. We are an optimistic group. We self-selected. We looked at the situation around us and we said to ourselves, there is a better way. There is hope, maybe not here right now, but somewhere else where we can rebuild, regroup. And I know with each sort of refugee groups and asylum seeker groups, there may be this idea of return as well. But I think, for at least among the South Vietnamese, that was very much in almost a fantasy, but it keeps, I think for among the adults, it was a very strong motivating force. But your question was about the issues that women face in Vietnamese refugee women faced in the United States. And I'll answer it by saying that, for us, because of the US involvement in the Vietnam War for so many years, I think one of the primary things that Vietnamese women refugees face was the fact that we were often seen as sex workers. That's how many US men who had served in the military, that was their first introduction to Vietnamese women. And so we were all sort of placed in that category when we came to the United States, whether we knew it or not. And some folks did not know it. And it, even though I said I was a child, that stereotype was pervasive even as I was growing up. And I surely didn't know it as a child. And I think the other component of it, which is very specific to the United States, was the fact that the United States had an existing Asian American community. In addition to the existing Asian American community was another stereotype, which is that we all looked alike. So in that sense, Vietnamese refugees came into this country and were painted with the group history of Asian America. And we did not know that group history. We did not know its history in connection with other racial ethnic groups. And so we became our bodies became symbolic of so many things that we did not necessarily understand. And it's a heavy burden. So it's not only our own personal history, but the other histories that are placed upon us.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the conversations you both had also kind of made me think a lot about how we also kind of need to challenge the narratives of being refugees and on what refugee is. And I think some of the keywords that I picked up were optimism, hope, and resilience. And I think just to quote Monique, in one of her conversations, she actually said, hope not here right now, but later where we can rebuild, regroup, right? So maybe for Leena and Monique, Monique, maybe you can share a bit more about how you rebuilt your lives and career in your host country. And for Leena, I'm weaving here some questions from our audience members. I think one from Saleh also. Hi Saleh, it's good to see you here. So maybe for Leena, why do you decide to start your own organization, and what does your organization do to support women? And also, do you have a strategy to support refugee women? Like, what are some of your method of struggle and agency? So maybe we can start first with Monique. So Leena might have a bit more time to think about Sally's question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me see. Would you mind rephrasing the question for me? Because I was so focused on what you were going to ask Leena. I was like, oh.
I'm sorry. No, of course, that's fine. I was just wondering whether you can share a bit more about how you rebuilt your life and career in your host country, or maybe even the US. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, for me, it was not so much a rebuilding, but a building, right? Because of my arrival here as a child. But I think that one of the things that I had to acquire, of course, was the English language, right? And I, in the process of acquiring fluency in English, I lost fluency in Vietnamese. And that's a very painful thing for me now as an adult. I can speak and understand Vietnamese, but on the level of a 6-year-old child, So that I felt that it was almost, now looking back upon it, it feels like the sacrifice I had to make, and that there was no, of course, I was living in a very small southern town with no other Vietnamese families, certainly children around. So there was no system in place within my family or outside my family to help me retain this very important component of who I am. For me, there is a distinct irony in the acquisition of the English language, which is I acquired a new language, but then I also became incredibly, I was almost a mute when I was a child, because I was so bullied, and I was so just, I think, apprehensive and scared that I rarely spoke up in school or elsewhere. And that unlearning then had to take place as an adult woman, to actually use my voice and to not be, just not to be scared, and that's the thing I would say about refugee children, is that they absorb so much of the fear and that their parents often feel. And you may not necessarily even understand as the child that this is happening, that you are absorbing this until you are an adult yourself. And what I'm referring to is basically, mental health issues that should really, if we can address early on, will help this generation of young people become healthy members of their community and of the host country.
Right, thank you, Monique. Yeah, it reminds me a lot about some of the resettled Korean refugees who are here in Philly, and the children who are actually going through quite a bit of a hard time due to the racism and xenophobia they face in school. So maybe I see a question from the audience about that, so we can pick up on that later. So maybe Leena, you could share a bit more about your response to the questions.
Yes, thank you so much. So I will start with Saleh's question. Yeah, he is asking about the strategy and how we changed the women's lives instead of just talking. That's why, and during my association, what I'm focusing in is to empower the women economically. So now I'm trying to deal with many partners and businessmen to create a platform for the women to start their projects from home, because yes, they cannot go out to work. It's not allowing in Malaysia, but I don't want them to just keep asking or just keep waiting for any donations or fund from others. As you know, Saleh, what is happening many times and with some NGOs, they just distribute some foods between time to time. And yes, we faced a lot of things from the NGOs because we don't need the food between time and time. We need like a small thing that's help us to start create something for the women to stand on behalf of themselves. I don't want any woman to ask any need from anyone. They are creative. They are talents. They have many. We have a lot of doctors and who are making organic products, beauty products, who are doing, who they used to be working in a beauty centers. We have engineering, we have secretary, we have all kinds of women. They are good, they are educated, they can do everything, but we need the platform. So what I doing and my strategy through my association is to create this platform, and I will fight to create this platform for the women because I created by myself, and now I'm recognized like a Yemeni businesswoman who is trying to stand up by myself. So I want all the women to know the way and to stand by themselves too. I want them to feel the freedom of doing something, of having something. We want to do this because usually we face a lot of bad things from many NGOs who just give some foods and they need some pictures of the refugees to show up on their social media, which we don't like it, never ever. So yes, we have a strategy and we will work in this and on this to make a superpower woman who can be also contribute to Malaysia economy as well. I hope that. And I have a lot of Malaysian who support this idea too. And hopefully one day I can do it for the women. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Monique and Leena, for that. There are a lot of questions coming in, and for those of you who actually have any other questions, please just post it in the chat box. We have about 20 minutes left, but maybe just to pick up on what Monique and Leena have been talking about just now. So oftentimes people who are pro-refugees in their countries, right, often tell their government and fellow citizens that refugees should be accepted because they can contribute to the economy, like what both of you have highlighted. But I'm also thinking about how not everyone is privileged. And I'm also thinking about the experiences of the Rohingya women I work with in Malaysia, right? And I remember there was one particular incident where we were doing homeschooling for the women, and at the age of 40 or 50, they can't even hold a pencil properly, right? And because of that, of course, it creates a lot of issues in terms of them wanting to work and not being exploited, right? People often think about how refugees equal to low wage labor, and therefore we can exploit them. So what do you think about when people talk about how refugees should be accepted because they can contribute to the community, right? They see refugees only in terms of their economic value and not as human beings, How can we then change the ways in which people view refugees? And Monique, also, if you can add on, what's the economic value? Or, you know, let's just not use any like economic terms, but like, you know, what's the contributions of a poet or novelist? I know like I probably have asked quite a bit of a question, and if you need me to rephrase certain things, just let me know. If anyone would like to just jump in to answer the question.
Yes, Monique, please.
Yes, yes. I'll be happy to begin so that Leena can have some time, because it is a big question that you've asked. I think that my first experience with this was as a young law student. I was working at a nonprofit focusing on Asian American civil rights. And there was, I remember, a cargo ship off the coast of New York called the Golden Venture. And on it was Chinese men who had been smuggled into the United States. And they were being held at immigration detention centers, and we went in to interview them. And as that series of sort of asylum cases progressed, what became clear and what was very surprising to me, because I had never encountered this before, was the fact that the men who were, some of the men had gathered together to make a large paper mache ship and other sort of items. And they were able to claim a kind of asylum status, which was for gifted or, yeah, essentially gifted people. And they were actually accepted, you know, and some of the other men who were not part of this did not succeed in their asylum cases. And it has always made me think of what you're talking about, which is sort of, reducing people, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, into what we can do for you, host country. You know, no one in the world wants to be seen as a parasite upon the country that they, want to be a part of or are within currently. But at the same time, to assume that a human being becomes a parasite per se because they have been forced to leave their own country because of war or economic circumstances or social upheaval of all kinds is incredibly reductive and painful. I think that for most human beings, for all human beings, we all want to feel, and we all want to, contribute to the world around us. But to have to justify our lives and our existence is, earlier on, I used the word optimist, right? Yes, I do believe that refugees are optimists, and in many cases, absolute heroes. But we are, at the fundamental level, another human being. and we would want our host countries and the community to treat us the way that they would want to be treated. If life handed to them what it handed to us, just an opportunity simply to live, to live and to have just another day, just another another moment, right, on this earth. And so, yeah, I cannot stress enough that we are, like, you know, like Setsu said, right, we are all bodies, you know, gentle and brutal. And that doesn't go away simply because we have moved our bodies from one, you know, from one country to the next. We are human beings. And that's the line. That's the thing that we all share.
Okay. Actually, I have different opinion about that. I believe that refugees also can bring back to the economy of the country, and I think it's fair that the community of the host country ask from the refugees to bring back. I feel it's fair to ask such a kind of thing, because we are also human. We can do something. We are not useless. We studied, we have educated people. So why it's like a kind of return back, like saying thank you for this country. It's same like we know, we learn new things and we contribute to the country that we are in, and we prepare ourselves that one day we will return back to our countries, so that we need to be ready to build our new country, to learn from the country. For example, I'm in Malaysia, and my home country is Yemen. So Yemen is under the war, is totally destroyed. So now during my time in Malaysia, me and other refugees, if we have like the opportunity to work, it will be amazing, that we will learn new things and we will bring back to Malaysia and learn to bring back to our country one day. So I think it's fair and good things to ask from the refugees to bring back to the countries. But there is something. The refugee, when he just arrived to the coast country, in the beginning, he needs to be educated. He needs to learn the language. So in the first, we need just to learn them how to can speak, even if I believe that all refugees will just temporarily lived in the host countries. One day the world will be safe. One day we will return back to our countries. So just what we needed from the host countries is to give us the opportunity and the chance to learn the language, to know the system, to know everything about this country, and give us the opportunity to work. We can bring back to the countries. That's really what I believe in.
Hey, thank you, Monique and Leena. Of course, this also reminds me a lot about, questions of like the politics of refugee gratitude, refugees having to perform deservingness. But I'm just going to shift the questions to what our audience members have, because I think we only have about 10 minutes and I'm not going to continue to ask your question. So maybe I'll just start with like Ellie Chua has a question like, Monique and Leena, where do you consider home? And what are your feelings now on belonging, now that you have spent years in your host countries, or for Monique, now that you're in the US?
Well, home is such a fraught word, right? I once was at a book signing, and the person who came up in the line asked me to write in his book what I thought was a superpower that I had. And I'll tell you why this is related to this question of home. And I thought about it, and very quickly, I realized if I had a superpower at all, it would be the ability to feel at home wherever I am, you know, in the sense that because I actually do not feel at home anywhere, you know, I can make anywhere my home. You know, it is kind of, it comes from the inside, not necessarily waiting for the people around me to make me feel at home, because I have found that to be incredibly difficult because of the regions of the United States where I have lived. I've lived in the American South, I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived in Texas. You know, this was all while I was growing up. No one there was going to make me feel at home, you know. And yeah, so I feel at home everywhere. And I know the things that are necessary to make me feel at home, which is really, really making connections with people, not necessarily based on ethnicity or race, but on an ethos, you know, you know, I would say my tribe, as it were, are fellow creatives, you know, writers and poets and anyone who is looking at their lives and saying, you know, this is the way it is, but I'm going to make it a little different. I'm going to make it, you know, work for me. That to and change it in the process. And that's my definition of creativity. It's not necessarily creating art, you know, as we understand it, but creating something new, you know. And in that sense, Leena is absolutely a creative. You know, she looked around and she said, there is something lacking here for my community, and I'm going to create something new. So yeah, so that's my response.
Okay, my response to the question, yes, of course, I missed my country. I missed everything in my home country, but also I feel safe and comfortable in Malaysia right now. I know one day I'll return back, so I'm like, nobody will forget about his home country, and one day we will return back and we will become like just a tourism to Malaysia or any country, hopefully that. So I think actually we have a history with Malaysia, Yemen and Malaysia. So we have similar traditions and a culture. So that's we feel like we are in our home country, especially during the Eids, some of the events in the year. We have similar things. We have many things to share. So we feel like we are in home country, but of course we should return back one day to our countries, and we will, inshallah. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Monique and Leena. And I think when we were talking about home and when we were talking about belonging, there's a question from an audience member on the question of like racism and xenophobia. So for Monique, it's a Vietnamese American, and for Leena, as a Yemeni in Malaysia. So Leena, you mentioned just now that you share like certain cultural traditions. So maybe if you could speak a bit more about like what's happening in Malaysia with racism during, especially during the pandemic against Yemenis. And if you could actually talk a bit about like whether Malaysians have been seemingly, like say, racist or otherwise to the Yemenis, because that happens a lot to darker skinned migrants like the Rohingya. And for Monique, the audience member is interested to hear a bit more about your experiences of growing up in a different culture in the US. And I remember, like, you know, as I was talking to a lot of the resettled Korean refugees from Myanmar here, like there's a lot of pushbacks because, you know, they're blamed for gentrification. Basically, they're blamed for everything, right? So were there support available for Vietnamese refugees where you were? And how accepting was the local community? So if any of you would like to start with the question.
If it's okay with Leena, I'll begin. Yeah, okay. So, well, you know, I think I referenced it a little bit earlier, but for when my family and I first came to the US, we were in a very, very small town in the state of North Carolina, which is in the American South. It was, it, you know, my day-to-day life as a student in elementary school was truly traumatic. I was bullied and called racial names every single day, names that I had no understanding about. I did not. At first, I thought they were confusing me with maybe Chinese people or, you know, other folks. And I kept on saying, I'm from Vietnam, but that wasn't, you know, it was not a misidentification, you know, it was simply a denigration of who I was. And for a very long time, I have to say that I couldn't understand how the kids around me had all these racial epithets that were specifically geared towards Asians, because there were no other Asians around me. And, you know, it was only when I grew up that I understood that it was their parents who must have taught these words to them, or, you know, they must have heard it on, you know, in movies or, you know, other forms of media. So yes, there wasn't a lot of acceptance. And yeah, it is still very painful to think about. And I think it was traumatic and damaging for me in ways that I am still exploring. I am 53 years old now, and these experiences, these formative experiences, are still incredibly painful. And I just wanted to end this response by noting something that I think must become clear to folks listening and watching, is that you know, Leena is referring to the possibility of return for the Yemeni refugees in Malaysia. And I think, you know, among Vietnamese refugees in the United States, at least very early upon our arrival, the idea of return was was impossible. I mean, the war was over and the communist regime was in place. Surely there were adults who had formerly been in the military who may have also, you know, had this idea of a possible return one day. But I think for the community at large, we understood that this was it. And for a long time before there was a diplomatic relationship between the United States and Vietnam, we could not, there was no physical return, whether we wanted to stay or just simply to visit. So, so I think that our mindset was different than what Leena and her community is sort of facing at this point. So I think that should have been clear, but you know, I just wanted to make it more apparent. So I'm going to hand it over to Leena now.
Yeah, just if I can just add point for what Monique said just now. The situation in Yemen is also complicated, is bad, is nobody can imagine that one day we can return back and live normally. Everything changed. The tenants details in Yemen changed. It's not a place for a human to live. Seriously. But we still have this passion. It's our country. We should stay thinking that we can complete the life. if I haven't hope that one day I will return back to my country, I cannot give anything to anyone because I will stay hopeless or something like that. So I keep tell my community and myself as well that you should learn because one day you will return back. You should learn for your country, for your kids, for the future, for Yemen. So I know it's complicated. Many of the communities, they know that it's impossible to have Yemen as what it was before, but no one knows. Nobody knows what's going. So we just keep dreaming and learning to be ready for this moment, whenever it will be. For the question, I forget what it was the question really. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, so maybe if you could just share briefly, because we're running a bit on time, but maybe let you know how whether the Malaysian community have been very welcoming or have been supporting the Yemeni community in Malaysia.
Okay, I will speak behalf of my community because it's really different feedbacks from community to community. I believe that there is some racism and things against some refugees, but if I will speak about my community, it's different. We have never seen or feel any unwelcoming from the Malaysian. We always see the support and the kindness from the Malaysian to the Yemenis, and I appreciate it. And that's why I feel comfortable in Malaysia and safe. Many times I get opportunities to go to another countries, like another host countries, but I choose to stay in Malaysia because I find myself in Malaysia and I see the welcoming and how people are feeling and they show their feelings to us as a Yemenis. I don't know, I don't want to speak behalf on the other communities because it will not be fair. But for the Yemenis, I appreciate that Malaysian are welcoming us, and there is a lot of them. They really help the refugees from many communities. Yeah, we haven't much time, so I can't say that's enough.
All right, thank you so much. I know that we have run out of time. And G, do we have time for just one very short question, or we should just end it?
If our two panelists are okay for a very short question to perhaps wrap up the discussion. Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, great. So maybe just to do a very brief lightning round of question, like Monique and Leena, what are some of the ways advocates can actually talk to people about the refugee experience, i.e. how we can change the narrative in talking about refugees?
Okay, let's, I would return to the words that I used earlier, and which is creative, intrepid, brave, optimistic. These are the stories. These are all part of the refugee experience. And it is also part, let me say, of the experience of asylum seekers, migrants, immigrants. And what I would really encourage is for folks to listen to the stories, listen to the individual stories, not just the country story or the, or the more like meta stories. Focus on the individual and what has motivated them to make the hardest decision of their lives, which is to leave everything that they knew behind and go elsewhere and rebuild.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Maybe, I guess, for people or folks like me, Matilda, and everybody else here in the audience, like, how can we actually also advocate or talk to people about the refugee experience?
Okay. What you can do it is just spread the stories of the refugees and how they were in their countries and how they are right now. I think this kind of stories can really reach to the heart directly and the mind, so that's people they can know more about the refugees. I met a lot of people who they have no idea what's the meaning of the word refugee. So we need to let the people know what's the meaning of the refugee or asylum seeker first. We have the platforms, you have your own platforms, everyone here have his own platform, so we can spread this message for everyone in your community or surrounded by you. So and spreading the stories of all refugees. We have amazing stories and sad stories, all stories we have.
All right, thank you so much, both of you. And due to the lack of time, I do apologize for those whose questions went unanswered, but please join me in a round of applause for Monique and Leena. Thank you again, Monique and Leena, for sharing with us whatever you have shared with us, and for us to learn and unlearn about the ways in which we can use our privilege to amplify refugee politics. So thanks again, and I'll just pass the time now to G to move on with the rest of the session.
Thank you so much, Wani, for moderating, this discussion and including such a wide range of questions, personal, political, as well as philosophical. Thank you very much for doing that. And of course, our heartfelt thanks to Monique and Leena for sharing your stories and your experiences. These experiences are very, very painful, even if they're in the past, because really, the past is never really past, is it? They are very much still with us. And as you're sharing these painful stories with us, we feel your pain, and we should feel the pain, because as Leena says, these stories have the power to actually reach directly for the heart. So we really appreciate your sharing these stories. We do not take your sharing lightly, but we will actually take them into our heart and continue with you in our heart. We want to thank everyone, all our guests, for your attendance and your participation at this event. We hope that you have found this event to be a very meaningful one, and that you have found a living metaphor or an image from the stories to bring away with you. To remind yourself of this event, you can also bring away with you a signed copy of Monique's book, The Sweetest Fruits. So far, we've sold a total of 4 books. We have 41 left. And it'll be wonderful to have all 45 books snapped up and to donate all the sale proceeds to Leenas' work at the Yemeni Refugee Women Association. Please consider getting additional copies for family and friends who cannot be here today, but who would love and who would benefit from hearing these stories. And by giving them a copy of this book, you will have a story to tell them about this gift of a great novel, The Sweetest Fruits. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And we're going to say goodbye to you for now. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.